Why are field guides so popular? What do field guides do? In my dissertation, I used the critical lens of eco-criticism to argue that field guides are political texts that profoundly shape the way we conceptualize and interact with the world around us. I start my project by looking at the most immediate predecessors to field guides, natural history texts that were popular in the 18th and 19th centuries. In the United States, the first book like this was Mark Catesby's The Natural History of Carolina, Florida, and the Bahama Islands, published over the course of several years beginning in 1729. What I argue in this section is that early natural history texts were an effort to exert dominion over colonial holdings by naming, classifying, and describing their plants and wildlife under the Linnaean system, displacing indigenous names that may have otherwise existed or competed as a form of discourse. The next big development in the field guide genre occurred in the late 19th century, when the books that most people recognize as the first field guides were published. Importantly, a lot of the authors that wrote these books were women. These female authors who couldn't vote or be scientists found that they were able to exert influence in the public sphere by using their association with and authority over domestic spaces as a means to enter conversations about broader issues. So authors like Florence Miriam Bailey, Mabel Osgood Wright, and Nelchie Blanchan wrote books that promoted different forms of nature study like bird watching or amateur botany as pursuits that were appropriate for children and adults because they yielded good health and good morals. And in the process, they made conservation advocacy a middle-class virtue. One final aspect of my research I'd like to mention is my close reading of the 7 editions of Roger Tory Peterson's Field Guide to the Birds, which was first published in 1934 and is almost certainly the most influential field guide ever. What I argue here is that because extinct birds receive increasingly detailed and lavish textual representation throughout the newer editions, there is a growing anxiety throughout the series over the extinction of American bird species. And what I draw from that is that the purpose of the Peterson series evolves from a purely utilitarian identification aid to a form of conservation advocacy. So when we try to answer the question of what do field guides do, I offer that the reason field guides continue to be so popular and cover new taxa and regions every day is because underlying the massive global effort to depict every living thing in a field guide is the same extinction anxiety I identified in Peterson's work. It's the desperate hope that if all people can have access to learning the names of all living things, then maybe we can save them from ourselves.